A lot of times when you go to a Kabbalah class, they teach you the book. And that's a really awesome thing because it's an awesome book. But what the point of the book is to really serve as a guide to actually connecting with God, to knowing God. That's why this book is called the Chaim. The Chaim were two trees in Gan Eden. The Eitz Hadat Tov Ra, that was the tree from which Adam and Chava ate, the tree of confusion between good and evil, that caused us to be confused between body and soul, caused the creation of our current state of being, where we have confusion between who we really are as souls and who we are as an ego, as a body. And the Eitz Chaim, which is the actual pure knowledge of God. It's not thinking about God, it's actually knowing God, almost, not almost, but literally in the biblical sense, in a very pure way, not in a lascivious way, but that pure, actual knowledge of God. So, let's start. Eitz Chaim begins very briefly. It was written 500 years ago with some questions that were there the day. And I want to basically skip over those because it's basically trying to answer questions that were there the day. So I want to start sort of on the second chapter because I don't think most of us are Kabbalists who have questions of 500 years ago, and so I want to start on the second chapter, believe it or not, the second branch. The beginning branch, I just want to begin it, and then I want to skip forward. בעניין תכלית הכוונה של בריאת העולמות, מבאר עתה שני חקירות שנתעסקו בהם המקובלים. So, regarding the purpose of why the worlds were created, the worlds, not worlds, just like the top physicists talk about today, that there are created worlds. Why were they created? There were two investigations that the early Mekubalim, the medieval Mekubalim, got into. החקירה הראשונה הוא מה שחקרו חכמים ראשונים ואחרונים לדעת סיבת בריאת העולמות, איזה סיבה הייתה ונמנו וגמרו וגזרו, ואומר כי סיבת הדבר היה לפי שהנה הוא יתברך מוכרח שישלם בכל פעולותיו וכוחותיו ובכל שמותיו של גדולה ומעלה וכבוד. ואם לא היה מוציא פעולותיו וכוחותיו לידי פועל ומעשה לא היה כביכול נקרא שלם, לא בפעולותיו ולא בשמותיו וכינוייו, כיני השם הגדול שהוא בין ארבע אותיות ההוויה, נקרא כן על הוראות הביאותו הנצחית וקיומו לעד, היה הווה ויהיה טרם הבריאה ובזמן קיום הבריאה ואחרי התהפכו על מה שהיה. I'm reading Hebrew because the light in this is all coming through the Hebrew, and I want it to penetrate through to who you are. So feel it and absorb it, even if you understand it, great, and if you don't, your soul really does understand it, I promise you. The process of creation, we normally think of as this amazing act of bringing yesh min ayin ayin, of something from nothing. And that's absolutely true from our perspective. But what we rarely think about is creation from God's perspective. What was creation from God's perspective? Was it bringing something from nothing?
Sorry.
Or was it, in fact, something a little bit different?
Thank you.
Or like bringing chaos from order.
Oh, good.
All we know about God before the creation of the world is was one. And you say, well, one what? That's the question we can't really answer. One, pure, absolute, mathematical oneness. It's a very unsatisfying answer. Because the God with whom we have a personal relationship, when we really, when you're talking to a 12-year-old, there's sort of, how did creation happen? Well, it sort of went poof, and that's an answer that a child will accept. When you really get into it in a deep, profound sense, how did it really happen? Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than just poof. It was a very, very complicated process if we're taking this seriously, which we really do. Welcome, by the way.
Thank you.
What's your name?
Linda.
Nice to meet you, Linda.
Thank you.
The God that we actually have a personal relationship with is something that God almost had to create from within himself, within the creation, if that makes sense to you. It's sort of like, I'll come back to this idea later, but the idea of God before creation is something that we can't at all relate to, because all there is one. The idea of meaningfulness, people talk about meaning all the time, but they rarely get into the idea of, well, what does meaningfulness or meaning mean? What does meaning mean? And it comes down to the idea of a relationship, of something connected to something else. Something has meaning insofar as it is in context, as it has connection or connectivity to something else. Things have meaning in context. Right has relation to left, up has relation to down, beautiful has relationship to ugly. If everything were beautiful, then nothing would be beautiful. That's the truth. We have contrast is what creates meaning, relationships. So before creation, by having pure, undifferentiated unity, oneness, absolute one, whatever that meant, we can't define it. We can't call it meaningful because there was no relationship with anything else. From that perspective, the act of creation was the ultimate act of destruction, bringing complete chaos out of unity. Taking absolute perfection and unraveling it. Now, you say, well, if that were the case, then, isn't God still perfect? Isn't God perfect now? Isn't God perfect after the creation? We'll get into that. Yes. Okay. Let's put that aside. Get there. It's a long book. I'm not, put that aside for a second. But that was one of the questions that the early Mukubalim got into, is what exactly is going on here? What exactly is this act of creation about? Why does it mean something? How does it work? So that was Hakir Arishona, the first investigation. Is that in order to actually be whole, God had to actually create himself. You're looking at me like, what? The first idea of why did God create the world? When we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, if you translate this literally, it doesn't say there's one God. It says Shema Yisrael, Hashem, God, Elokeinu, our God, is one. We're saying all is one. And what we're saying here, by this idea of collapsing oneness into Pirud, into multiplicity, is this idea that the reason God created the world was in order to have wholeness, in order to have that relationship, in order to be defined as whole, as one, as king, as as one in relationship to many. Because even by being, how can I say this to you? You can't even be defined as whole in the absence of separation. Is everybody following what I'm saying? If there's no contrast at all, if there's no edge, if there's no end, there's no beginning. If there's no context, there's no meaning at all. You're looking at me like did you want to? You're squinting. So, okay. Regarding the first basic idea, the first investigation they got into was this idea of creating a relationship, creating a forum in which there could be a relationship. Now, if you take this idea to the ultimate extreme, which you have to, because you're dealing with absolutes. I mean, you're literally dealing with absolutes, with God. The absolute opposite of unity is, of course, chaos. And that basically is basically the world we live in, absence the structure of man, of humanity doing the right thing, doing what we call, what we in our minds call godliness, the right thing. We live in a world that is full of chaos. This is what all the philosophers, secular philosophers, how they define our world, is basically complete and utter chaos, light, nasty, brutish, and short, if you want to quote the French philosophers. This is the exact opposite of godliness. This is when we get into the idea of vul, of boundary, of border, of the igulim and yosher, the space that God creates for himself, for the existence. This is the bitter end of existence, of how far it can go before you literally fall off the edge, just finds the edge. Let's keep going. Anybody want to ask any questions very quickly?
Do you have enough light? You want to sit here? Or?
I'm great.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, good.
Why did God want to do it?
There's two answers to that. The standard answer is an act of pure loving kindness. This is what I would call the ego answer, because it's an answer that's coming from our perspective once we're already here. Okay? So it's very much answering the question from our perspective, our emotional need perspective, saying, why did God do this? It's like from my perspective of an emotionally needy person. I don't mean needy in a bad sense. I mean, every human being is an emotionally needy person. That's what it is to be human. But why did God do this is because as an act of pure giving. The nature of unity is to be giving. That's the essence of what it is to be one. Completely whole is to be completely giving. The essence of something that's white. It means it contains all colors, so it reflects, all light. That's what white is. When we see something as white, it's because it's reflecting all of the light. Because that's what white is. It's pure giving. I think the more, if I could put it more abstract answer, would be that God was compelled to do so, in a sense, in order to achieve a greater level of wholeness. And it's the nature of godliness to want to be more godly, if that makes sense. It's like, and then you can say, well, how is this more godly? How can you be more one if you're already one? it's a little abstract, but we can all understand that infinity plus 1 is conceptually a bigger number than infinity. It's a mathematical concept, but it's something that is conceptually true, even if it's, it's a little out there, but it's conceptually true, even if it's a little bit abstract. We tend to get into math when we start talking pure Kabbalah because it's a fantastic analogy, and it's not even an analogy. It's, math is the language of the universe because it's one level. In science, it's like one level. It's a language. It's like the language of Torah. It's like there's one way of reading Torah where it's letters and it reads like a story, and there's another way of reading the Torah where it's just a sheet of numbers, gematria. It's just another way of reading the Torah. I'm sorry.
What I learned is that the reason that God created the world was that there was only God. There was no one to give to. There was no one to be known by, and God wanted to be known. And so we also have that desires like God, that we have the desire to give and we have the desire to be known. So God had no one to know God. He wanted that reflection.
More of a Hasidic way of saying it.
And I think it's from Chaim.
Yeah, it's a Hasidic way of saying it. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's beautiful. וכן שם אדנות נקרא כן, על הוראות אדנות חיות לו עבדים והוא אדון עליהם, ואם לא היה לו נבראים לא יוכל להיקרא בשם אדון, על דרך זה ושאר שמות כולם. וכן בעניין הכינויים וכולי ברכו וחנון ערך אפיים לא יקרא על שמם זולת להיות נבראים בעולם שיקרא ערך אפיים, etc. So the idea here is talking about, again, the names of God. Basically what it's saying here in short form is that we talk about the names of God all the time in Kabbalah and also even in every aspect of Torah. This is sort of like, think of them almost like lenses, like lenses of light, the names of God, letters, the holy letters of Hebrew. This is really the lenses through which God's light shines down into the world and actually bends and creates the world. That's why we're able to have a table, chairs, ceilings, trees, aardvarks, machinery, people. Behind everything is names of God. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Matrix, where at the end everything converts into, he sees through everything on a high level, and everything converts into, circuitry. It's if you didn't see it, it's a little tough to imagine, but if you did see it, it makes a lot of sense. It's a great analogy. That's the way the whole world really actually looks on a higher spiritual levels. Everything is just these permutations of names of God that are just funneling God's light into the world and funneling out the creation we see, and bending the light so that the creation we see comes into existence. Did you want to ask something? You look like you're no, you're okay. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay. Anyway, let's jump forward a little bit. בעניין אין סוף ברוך הוא, איך היה התחלת אצילות העולמות הנאצלים ממנו? So regarding Ein Sof, Ein Sof means literally without end, so the infinite. How was it that the worlds actually began getting emanated from Ein Sof? How did this process actually happen? וגם החקירה גדולה ומחלוקת עצום נחלקו בו כל מקובלים כולם, כי יש מי שכתב 10 ספירות, הם כסדר 10 מדרגות, זו אחרי זו, וזו למטה מזו. And this was a huge conflict in the early Mekubalim, because I'm sure here everybody is familiar with the concept of the Sfirot or has heard of them. There was a major controversy whether it's in the, whether it's a linear arrangement, whether it's, like this, or whether it's in the classic arrangement, whether it's like this, that pretty chart that everyone's seen, the Kabbalah Center, talking about. So there was this huge, big, conflict back and forth as to, one camp arguing like this, another camp arguing like that. The argument was waging back and forth for about 700 years. It was a big tussle for quite a while. It was not so clear. And when if you read the Zohar and you're trying to just go off the Zohar, there's different ways of trying to figure it out. Okay, so V'yesh mi shekatav ki seder amidatan derech kavin yamin u'smol ve'emsa. And so some said it was in a line, and some said that it was actually three sfirot. I lost my place there. Hachan, which is Chesed, Chokmah, Chesed, Netzach, Zohar, Gavzo. This on top of that, on the right, and three Sfirot, Bina, Gevora, Hod, Zohar, Gavzo, the Kav small, and Arba Sfirot, Keter, Tiferet, Yesod, Malchut, Zohar, Gavzo, the Kav Emsai. And again, what we're really talking about here is it's fine. I'll give a quick background on what Sfirot are because it's important. He's basically talking here, assuming he's talking to a very erudite audience. What Sfirot really are is processes of doing anything. So, for example, you could think of it in a very physical sense, like building a house. If you wanted to build a house, the very first thing you'd have to do is have the abstract desire to do something. That just have that inspiration, that I want to do something moment, and you can't even explain what it is. Just the motivation that you can't quite explain yet. It's still too abstract to really formulate into words. That's Keter, the crown, that light, that big light that's coming down from above, where it's just pure undifferentiated light, godly light, but it isn't in any kind of actual form yet. It's not what they call mochin, or in modern, it literally means brains. Moach in modern Hebrew means brain. Again, modern Hebrew all comes from this, so it's kind of a backward thing, because modern Hebrew, they take biblical words and they try and they stick terms to it, like the word for they take like words from Yechezkel's chariot, and they the vision of the chariot, and of godly light, and they call it like a weather phenomenon or something like that. It doesn't, it's not what it's talking about. So Israelis get confused about that kind of stuff all the time. They can read it, but they misinterpret what it's talking about. But I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought from you guys are too good an audience. We used to having people throw popcorn. Where are we going
Talking
first?
about the processes of building.
Yes.
You were going to explain all the Sfirot.
With Chokhmah, it's when it comes down to actually being from just a burst of light to actually being a vision. But that vision is a general vision. It's not a specific vision. It's the vision of a house on a hill. Almost think of it like, like I think a great way to explain it would be like Monet, like the Impressionists. It's an impression. It's like, I've got this idea, this big general idea. That's the idea of Chokhmah.
What's Chokhmah?
Yeah, sure. It's not with any specifics. But once you say to yourself, okay, but really, how many rooms does it have? Is it on a hill or in a valley? You know, is it on the edge of the hill? Is that a stairwell over there? You know, what is that thing? Is that door have an arch, or is that thing straight across? Now you're getting, that's Bina, where you're trying to get into all the details of it, the structure. So we went from the masculine line, the right side of the big overarching sweeping picture, to all of a sudden the highest side of the feminine side, where we're getting into all of the details. But again, we're not to action yet. We're not doing anything. It's still in our mind. This is still, we're talking about a mental process here. We're not talking about having done anything yet. We're talking about how we're conceptualizing this. Now, again, I'm talking about how we do things, but the way we understand how God does things is to a certain degree by understanding how we do things. One of the most repeated statements in the Zohar Kadosh and throughout Tanakh and of course in Kabbalah is Mibsari echazeh Eloka, from my flesh I see God. And of course that does not mean that God literally has a human body. You know, we know a religion that did that, and it took it a little too far. Yeah. But it means that God created us in His image, in the sense that our soul, our character traits, the way we process things is a mirror for God, and by making ourselves whole, that's what it means to be godly, to be completely whole within who we are. Once we go down from Bina, we get down to our correct vision. And that's what Tiferet is, the idea of balance, where we really have, let's go the other way. Once we have that vision together, we go down to Chesed. And what Chesed really is we're going down again to the right side. But now we're trying to implement it. We're down to make the analogy here, it's into the body. And I don't want to get off on a whole thing with the Sefirot right now. I want to kind of save this for later. But the point I'm trying to get at is that this is one of the big Hakirot that we were getting into. I would like to get through it fairly quickly, but this introduction is about this idea of the Sefirot is really about process, and of course it goes from mental to preparatory to action. And I think you guys have the basic ideas what Sefirot are. In a human, you can apply it to anything with people, with a table and chairs, and of course, obviously here in the most abstract, with the creation of heaven and earth. Okay. Did anybody want to ask any questions about that very quickly before we go on? You okay, Nina? You sure? 100%?
I don't know, 100%.
85? I'll settle for that. I'll take 85%.
Oh, that's a big.
Okay.
I want to say my book, New Age Judaism, goes all into the Sefirot. More details.
Know that before the formed were emanated, v'nivru hanivraim, and the created were created. Ha'or elyon pashut memale kol mehametziut. The highest light filled the entire existence. V'lo haya shum makom panoi b'shchinat avir rekani v'chalal. And there was no empty space in the sense of avir here doesn't literally mean air. It means more like emptiness or void. And chalal is literally space or void. Ela kol haya me'uleh min ha'or ein sof. Pashut, and rather everything was completely full of God's light. Don't forget, on the first day of creation, what was created? Let there be light. So when, in terms of time, just to go off on a very brief tangent, people think that, that the 6 days of creation, the 7 days of creation, are referring to actual calendar days. Judaism has never held that because you can't have a day without a sun and a moon and an earth. And on the first few days, there was no sun and moon and earth. So how can you possibly be referring to calendar days when the heavenly bodies don't even exist? It's an absurd concept. So it's obvious that these days are time periods rather than calendar days. מן האור אין סוף פשוט והוא ולא היה לו בחינת ראש ולא בחינת סוף אלא הכל היה אור אחד פשוט שווה בהשוואה אחד. But rather, this light had no rosh token sof. This is the had literally, I'll translate literally, had no head, middle, or tail. Basically, it had no dimensionality. It had no, I like that word dimensionality. It was not in 3 dimensions. It was not in 2 dimensions. It was non-dimensional. We're talking really before the creation of space. He's literally saying this is before the Big Bang. This is before the emanation of space, before there was place. So we're talking about light, energy, without place, if that makes sense to you. It's a little bit hard to get our minds around the idea that there can be, a creation in process, but think of it kind of like dialing the first 6 numbers of the telephone, where it's not quite there yet. Until you dial the 7th number, it doesn't go through. There isn't place until there's place, even though the act of creation is in process. You follow what I'm saying? And that's where we're at right now, is filling up of this potential, place, as it were, even the place without place, with light. And when it came upon God's simple will, simple not in the sense of, retarded or something like that, but obviously just completely pure and undistracted, absolutely focused will. Livro ha'olamot, to create the worlds, ולהציל הנאצלים להוציא לאור שלמות פעולותיו, and to bring to light the wholeness of his works, v'shemotav v'kinuyav, and his names and kinuyav. This is a very interesting term. It literally means his nicknames, but this is talking about terms like Hashem Sevaot, or other names of God that don't have the same holiness as the actual names of God, but still are referring to God, but they still have a degree of holiness to them. אשר זאת היה סיבת בריאת העולמות כמבואר אצלנו בענף אחד, which was the purpose of the creation of the world, as we explained earlier. הנה אז צמצם את עצמו אין סוף. Right. Then God tzimtzem. This is an important word to remember. God contracted himself, constricted himself. Into a central point, into one point, a tiny, non-dimensional point. And it's a funny thing, because he says a middle point, but I'll leave you with a mind teaser. The middle of what? Because wherever he put it, that's the middle. Get it? Like, if there's only one point and that's all of existence, wherever it is the middle, right? By definition, that's it. Asher bo be'emsa oro mamash. So, and in this point, this is very strong language. It's kind of subtly strong, but it's still very strong. asher bo be'emsa. Which in the middle of this non-dimensional point was God's light mamash, like really strong, really strong. 100 years ago, if I were reading this, I'm not sure it would hit me quite as hard as nowadays when we understand the Big Bang all emanated from a point, a non-dimensional point. I mean, when you think about what that means, but I don't mean a pea, I don't mean the head of a pin, I mean something literally with no dimension, a point, a nikuda, a place with no dimension at all. God's light was concentrated into this point. Amar Meir, this is one of the Talmidim, Ve'arichu amar harav ze v'kaimana. וצמצם האור ההוא ונתרחק אל צדדי סביבות הנקודה האמצעית, ואז נשאר מקום פנוי ואוויר וחלל ריקני נקודה האמצעית ממש בזה. So this is one of the more famous, I jokingly refer to this as pictures of God, God forbid. So, and you'll see in the whole Torah, it doesn't matter if I hold it upside down, it looks the same. And the eighth Chaim, there's only about 2 or 3 pictures in the whole book, but this is one of them. So,
A picture, where's
I'm pointing at it, it's really little.
It's,
That little circle with the dot in it.
okay.
Yeah. They weren't great at drawing picture books 500 years ago. They just sort of did it. So he says that, after concentrating himself into God, concentrating himself into this middle point, obviously you said, well, where's the middle? Well, wherever you put the point is the middle. God immediately withdrew from the point. Now, I'm going to ask you, and I want you to think about it, if God's withdrawing from the point, by definition, what shape is it going to create around the point? To withdraw from a point.
Circle.
More specifically?
The vacuum.
Well, more specifically, a circle in 3 dimensions, a
bowl.
A sphere.
A sphere.
Right. And it has to be a sphere, because otherwise it would be an unequal shape. It's not optional. That's the only shape it could be. It can't be a square, it can't be a pentagon, it can't be an octagon, it can't be a trapezoid. It has to be a sphere. Make sense?
If God is withdrawing from a point, where is he going?
Okay, so when you say withdrawing, it's a very funny thing, because obviously the immediate question should be, what do you mean he's withdrawing? Like he's not there? Like it's a crazy idea when God's not there. How can you have there without God? There doesn't exist if there is no existence. Doesn't exist without God. So what are you talking about? Okay, so this is the idea of this simsum. Again, recognize we're way before the creation of place. We haven't gotten to the creation of space yet. If you understand how early we are, we're not to creation of space and time yet. We're before that. But before we get to that, what does it mean to say that God withdrew from a place? So the first thing I said, this important verb is God tzimtzem et etzmo. God concentrated himself in this non-dimensional point and then withdrew from there. And it has to be equally. So therefore, necessarily the withdrawal creates a sphere. So what we're really talking about is you know, do you feel like I'm really talking to you?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel now? Can I have a conversation with you like this? I mean, can't we talk like this? I mean, can't we be friends? I mean, what's the matter? Can't we talk?
No,
Why not? I'm here. I'm just as here as I was before.
but you're not in a relationship with me.
Of course I am. I'm just as here as I was 2 minutes ago.
Detention.
It's that's the idea that we're getting at here. Is it's a concept of presence. You know, God is just as present, but there is a presence that's withdrawn. There is an intensity of a vibrational intensity that is removed. There is an intensity that has been withdrawn. Make sense? And that's the difference between what's going on inside of the Nikuda and what is being removed. But whereas what I showed you was this much different, what God is doing is wildly different. We're talking just, you know, factors of, you know, trillions and trillions of, you know, light years of difference. You know, of just huge, massive, you know, unbelievable concentration inside the dot, and then basically complete withdrawal from that space in progressive form. Makes sense? You know? But when I say withdrawal, I mean withdrawal, but I really mean withdrawal of presence, not withdrawal of essence. It's a subtle concept, but it's a very, very important distinction. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, that was very helpful.
והנה הצמצום הזה היה בהשוואה אחת בסביבות הנקודה האמצעית. So it's very important to remember this. The צמצום הזה היה בהשוואה אחת. So the constriction was equal around the nikuda. Now, you know, these are basic concepts in Kabbalah, but I'll tell you, people who go on, they learn Kabbalah for years, and 5 years later they get confused, they don't know what they're talking about, and they have questions, and they get, it's because they didn't really learn this stuff really carefully. Because these opening, you know, these opening chapters, the first 20 pages of Chaim is some of the absolute deepest stuff that exists. And every letter of this stuff is really, really, really profound. So when it says Bahashva Ayachat, with absolute equidistant, what would happen if it were slightly not equidistant?
Be in balance, yeah.
Right, but I mean, really think about it. What would happen? What would creation look like? I mean, why can't it be like that? Why can't it be that the essence of God, that think of it like I'm not explaining this, like, you know, like things attract each other incredibly strongly. You know, if two people have incredible chemistry, they're just drawn to each other. You know, if two magnets are in sync, they're just like that. Times, you know, infinite, literally infinite, with God. You know, if the shape were even a trillionth of a degree off kilter, all of a sudden the entire creation would collapse because God is so attracted to the negative, which is you've got here ultimate expansion with its opposite, ultimate constriction. Now, what I've implied here, and it's obvious once you see it, is the root, the premise, I should say almost, of masculine ultimate expansion and feminine ultimate constriction. Now, it's in such abstract form that it doesn't look like that, but it's way down the line. When we get much further on into creation, you're going to see that this is ultimately the roots for masculine and feminine in existence, is the idea of endless giving with that pure light that's outside of the halal, outside of the space, and the vessel, which is that point in the absolute center of creation that has absolutely no shape, no form, no space at all. The absolute opposite of that. These are the roots of masculine and feminine in creation. Basically, they're the polar opposites of infinitude. The ultimate constriction and ultimate expansion. Make sense? You know, that's what really is being set up here at this point at this stage in the creation process. Anybody want to? You look like you have a question.
No, I'm still back on, how God had to be perfectly spherical.
Right.
But
When I say the masculine and feminine thing,
I got it.
Okay.
Okay, I follow you there.
Okay.
It's so interesting because the nothingness is like a black hole ultimately, and when you would say you wouldn't understand this the same way about light concentrating. I was thinking, well, now we have lasers and we know how powerful concentrated light can be.
Right. Yeah. It's. I mean, we're just basically finding out, in the last 100 years, and right now history is accelerating, and we're really getting up to Imot Mashiach, and it's, I don't want to get off on a whole other topic, but right now it's getting to the point where you can, everything in here is just becoming. You can just go to any bookstore, and any physics book reads just like this. It's just shocking. I mean, it's really, really mind-blowing how physics is confirming everything well known for thousands of years. It's really mind-blowing, quite frankly. Anyway, let's go forward. Okay. Okay. והנה הצמצום הזה היה בהשפעתך בסביבות הנקודה האמצעית. So it's equal all around the center point. ריקנית ההיא באופן שמקום החלל ההוא היה עיגול מכל סביבותיו. Rather, a circle in its completely surrounding it, בהשוואה גמורה, completely equal. ולא היה תמונת מרובה בעל זוויות. There were no corners. ניצבת לפי שגם אין סוף צמצם עצמו, because also אין סוף constricted himself בבחינת עיגול בהשוואה אחד, in the aspect of a sphere that was completely equal מכל צדדים, והסיבה הייתה לפי שכיוון שאור אין סוף שווה בהשוואה גמורה, הוכרח גם כן שצמצם עצמו, because Or Ein Sof was completely equal. It was forced, really, is the language he's using. Gam ken shetzamtzem etzmo b'ashvah echad kol hatzadidim, and all the sides. Sides is a funny word to use when we're talking about a sphere, but that's the language he used. V'lo shetzamtzem etzmo mitzad echad, or rather, it couldn't press himself more into one side, I guess you'd say, of the sphere, meaning shar tzadidim. Chokhmat Shiur, meaning Chokhmat Shiur is, I guess, what they called geometry back in the day. שאין תמונה כל כך שווה כמו תמונת העיגול. There's nothing equal like a sphere. מה שאין כן בתמונת מרובה. So we're just going basically explaining what I was saying. Skip ahead a little bit. Quoting the Zohar. Okay. עוד יש סיבה אחרת, and there's also another reason. והוא בעבור הנאצלים אשר עתיד להצילם. And there's also another reason why we did this whole thing in a sphere. Another reason. And that was because in the future, looking ahead, that's now, because עתיד להצילם אחר כך בתוך המקום אחריו, because when the created things, mostly people and animals and plants and everything else, are going to be created inside of the halal, הוא הרי כפנוי לישראל. והעניין הוא, and the idea is, כי בהיות הנאצלים בתמונת העיגולים, הנה אזי, because when they will be made inside of the sphere, הנה אזי יהיו כולם קרובים ודבוקים באין סוף. All of them will be close and dvukim. It literally means glued or pasted, something like that. But what it really means is attached, like connected. The idea connected to the light of God is really what the idea is giving here. So in other words, by having the nekuda, the creation, inside of a sphere, a spherical relationship with God, the creations would all have an equal relationship with God. והנה אזי יהיו כולם קרובים ודבוקים באין סוף, הסובב אותם בהשוואה אחת, גמורה, והאור והשפע צריך להם יקבלום מן אין סוף, ומכל צדדיהם בשיקול אחד. So in other words, they'd all receive their light, their sustenance, their radiance, their connection to their Creator equally. It wouldn't be an unequal connection because some would be farther if they're over here, some would be closer if they're over there. Which would not be obviously the case if there was a cube or something like that. Now, what's very interesting about this is this suggests, okay, and I say this stepping out a little bit from the strict, the strict text, but it suggests experientially, multidimensionality, dimensionality, is that the right word? Dimensionality. Because experientially, you don't get more spirituality on the top of a high mountain than you do sitting at the Dead Sea. There's no more spirituality way up there than there is low down, or with a heavy ceiling over your head. This is obviously not talking about an actual three-dimensional dome over the earth. It's clearly not what it's talking about. So what is it talking about? It's not talking about just literally a round ball around us. It's talking about something a lot more subtle and abstract and that we experience, that we really do experience. And we all have an equal relationship with. But it's not just, be clear here that we're not just talking about something that's limited to 3 dimensions. This isn't just, we're on a round earth, and so there's this round relationship with God, and God is up. It doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. I see people when they're beginning to pray, and they typically start out with this idea of praying out here or something like that. That's usually the sort of beginning place to pray out. A lot more, at a certain point people progress, and a lot of times they kind of go like this, and then they kind of get the idea that God is inside of them as much as outside of them. A distortion is to think that God is only in me, and that's a big problem. That sort of is a guru twist on it, where you sort of start getting outside of Judaism. That's not really where it's at. You start thinking, I am God, that kind of thing. But that's not true either. But the truth is that God is not creation. That's pantheism. But God is not disconnected from the creation either. It's not something else. It's rather God fills the creation, and God is also infinite beyond the creation as well. But it's
because we live in time and space,
right.
so we have God outside and inside, but from God's perspective, there's
the basic point I'm trying to say is that the way this reads, if you read it on too literal a level, is you can get stuck in this idea that this is really talking about a very three-dimensional structure, and then you hit something all of a sudden where you don't understand anything you were reading at all, because that line you're reading suddenly makes the last 3 pages you read with that mentality not work. But you can read it for a long time with that way of thinking, and he'll let you go like that for a long time. But then you hit something, and then you realize that that was completely not what he's talking about. So I just want to say right now, just be clear that we're not talking about something here that exists just in 3 dimensions. We're talking about something that's a lot more multidimensional and abstract than that. Okay, something that's really multi-layered. עניין הצמצום הזה הוא לגלות שורש הדינים כדי לתת מידת הדין אחר כך בעולמות, וכוח ההוא נקרא בוצינה וקרניתה כמו חטא קרינותה. Okay, so this is a note from Madhura Batra. So this is just a head note, but I'll read it out to you. So the concept of the Tzimtzum is basically the shorish, the root of the creation of the sacred feminine. This is what it's all about. Is the Tzimtzum, the act of the creation of space, of space-time, of the Nikuda, of existence, is the creation of the Zulat, the other, the what would eventually, way down the road, be be paralleled in human form as the Ezer Kenegdo, as the in biblical terms, the helpmate or something like that. However you want to translate it. Here in abstract language, I'll just translate for you very literally. So inyan hatzimtzum hazeh, so the idea of the constriction is to reveal the shoresh, the roots of the dinim. I don't want to translate the word dinim. It literally means judgments or laws, something like that. But that's not really what it means. It means more like something more like harshness or severity or constriction. It's basically, think of it more in terms of process than anything else. It's more of a concept than a noun. It's like the idea of a vessel, the idea of something that holds something, the idea of something that defines something, rather than something that that flows. It's the idea of something that contracts or constricts or restricts. So for example, in law, what do laws do? What is the function of law? It defines the rules of society. It defines the power structure in society. Who's in charge? Who's not in charge? What are the rules? You know, if you make a contract and you do this defines what the rules are, what happens if you break the rules, you know, etc. Those are the dinim. Those are the.
And that's the feminine.
That's the feminine. That's the feminine. That's not the masculine. Okay. That's the vessel. Okay. The masculine is the flow. It's the river. It's the light. It's the constriction with it's the lack of boundaries. It's the thing that, you know, it's the water. It's not the banks of the river. It just gushes everywhere. You know, it's the light of God that doesn't have any boundaries. It's just you know, it's like with Chokhmah when we're talking about Shiur. It's the big picture. It's not the details of the blueprint. Makes sense, everybody? What is it? Munasabah? Yeah. Okay. So we're very, very high up in the very, very beginning of creation here. Again, we're talking about this very, very, very subtle and very, very profound. I don't even want to use the word step, but this profound interplay between abstract oneness and the beginning of what will eventually become existence, going from pure undifferentiated consciousness, just the unity of God, to what are ultimately the roots of existence. And by existence, he's clarifying right here that what we're really talking about is the roots of the dinim, the roots of the sacred feminine. Be very clear, we're not talking about the sacred feminine. That's definitely not what we're talking about. And the reason we're not talking about that is because it's just way too abstract. We're way too high up to talk about masculine or feminine. We can't talk about that at this point. It's just, we're way too close to talking about just undifferentiated oneness. To get to talk about masculine and feminine, you really have to be in the level of plurality. There has to be two. You can't be talking about just one. And we're still talking about just one. But this is the most abstract roots of the feminine. בדינים כדי לתת מידת הדין, אחר כך בעולמות בכוח ההוא נקרא בו שנאה דקרנליתה. So in the language of the Zohar, this root is called the lamp of darkness. The Zohar uses poetic language a lot, and that's the lamp of darkness that is referred to in the Zohar. So anyway, let's keep going forward a little bit more. So after this simsum, this constriction that was discussed before, after which this halal, this space, and avir, and this air, don't think that means oxygen, just to be clear, was left empty and void. The emsa or ha'en sof. So in the middle of the infinite light, which is different than Ein Sof, by the way, or Ein Sof is like a lavush. It's like a garment, you could almost say, on God. The light of God is not God. It's like saying, you want to say?
No.
You know, it's like saying, you know, it's like saying, you know, your skin, your this, it's, you know, but it is an external covering. It's not the thing itself. It's not actually God. So, Or Ein Sof Mamash K'Nisrael, Hine Kvar Haya Makom Shuklu Liyot Sham Hanetzalim. So there was already a place, already this early, there was a place Liyot sham netzalim. We've already made a place for the emanated, and he puts it in that sort of reflexive term for the emanated. Hanetzalim v'anivraim, and the created. Notice we haven't created anything yet. We haven't emanated anything yet. V'yitzurim, and the to be created, and the to be formed. Excuse me. V'anahasim, and the made. It reflects the form again. Notice we haven't made anything yet. Ve'az himshich min ha'or, and lahamshich means to. I hate to use this word because it has so many implications in New Age, but I'm going to do it anyway. And God forgive me. God channeled the light. Channeled is I don't know what to do with that because it's such a I don't have a better word for it, but it has so many. It's such a loaded word in 2016. But God, do you have a better word? Yeah,
I like channel.
Okay. It doesn't mean that, but it means something close to that. It's like okay, let's just go with it.
Beamed it.
I love it. With Captain Kirk, right? Okay. And so as קו אחד ישר מן האור, להיגור שלו מלמעלה למטה, ומשתלשל ויורד תוך החלל ההוא כזה. Okay. So God channeled the light from above into the halal, into the space. Again, we're talking about this sphere, down to the nikuda. And then he says, kazeh. And I'm about to show you probably the most discussed, debated, argued about, torn apart, thumbnail sketch in the history of Judaism. And it's right here on the third, right in the beginning of its time. This is actually, I think, the last picture in the entire book. But in the history of Judaism, I don't think there's been such an argued about thumbnail sketch anywhere. So this thumbnail sketch right here, and this is right here, is Rav Chaim Vital's picture of God coming down from. I love these pictures of God, aren't they great?
It really looks like him.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I'll send him a selfie. Okay, so there's not so much to see, but the idea is into this sphere, God comes down in a line, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, and this is really deep, and you can get into this deeper and deeper and deeper, but the basic idea is that, as we were saying before, why did it have to be perfectly spherical? Remember we had that whole conversation? Is because if it weren't, it would collapse, right? So the nature of two things that are fantastically drawn to each other is to connect. And so we see that what they actually do is to connect. Now, what this connection does is it's really about, think about what we're really connecting here. We're connecting polar opposites of the infinite that God has, in a sense, sorted out from within himself. So, one thing that's really important here to conceptually just establish right from the beginning is that these two polar opposites of infinite expansion and infinite restriction existed in potential before we started any of this. I mean, it sounds obvious, I mean, once you point it out, but the potential for all of this was there before we revealed it, right? And so what we're really saying is that the act of creation was a sense of really about revealing what was already there within the oneness. It wasn't a sense of God creating something in the sense that we normally think of creation, which is like making something outside himself. Rather, it's a sense of revealing from within that which was already there in potential. Does that make sense?
But he can never create something outside of himself, right? Because he was all there is.
Well, create something outside of himself. I mean, you're kind of giving a brain teaser, but let's say like this. There is by definition no place outside of the place of God. You see what I'm saying? So when you say outside of God, there is no place outside of God. There is no place does not exist. The concept of place does not exist outside of all that is, which is God. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, rather, the world is God is the place of the world, not the other way around. Amazing. The follows coming. So, so let's keep going. בראש העליון של הקו נמשך מן האינסוף עצמו ונוגע בו. So, and the head of this line was brought down מן האינסוף עצמו ונוגע bो. So, it was brought down from above, meaning above again, means from outside the halal. I'm going to use the Hebrew, it means the space, down toward the nikudah, toward the point, and remains touching it. So we're basically forming almost like, you could almost think of it like a little bit of like a hurricane kind of thing, but without quite as much, like I don't mean like a storm, but, something that, it comes down from above, from this cloud. Now the thing, a lot of times people think of this halal, this space, kind of like a glass ball, and it's a nice, clean, easy way to think of it. But it's a little bit more accurate to think of it more like the atmosphere. Where is space? How far up do you have to go to get into space? If you go up 30 miles, are you suddenly in space? Well, what about 31? What about 29? I mean, is there really such a difference? It's a progressive change. It's not, there's not really like a hard edge to it. You see what I'm saying? And the same thing with this halal, like it's a nice convenient way to think of it, like a glass ball, like a bowling ball or something, where there's just this edge, and then it's God, and inside there's space. But it's more accurate to think of it more like a gaseous ball, if that makes sense, where it's a very progressive border that's not perfectly defined. Can you go with that? Now, into that, though, the line comes down, and the line, we think of a line, it's a little bit of a contradictory thing here, and you got to understand why this. When we start going through this won't make any sense if you try to think of this too rigidly in three-dimensional terms. But because a line is like this, and then he starts talking about things that don't go like this, because lines are perfectly straight. You follow me? Okay, so there are aspects of this that are perfectly straight, and there's aspects of this that are more like, kind of like a cloud coming down, and more like a, how can I put it? More like a, flowing stream of consciousness. Okay, and so we'll see what happens with that. And the flowing stream of consciousness between the infinite expansion and the infinite contraction, which is the nikuda, the dot in the middle. So let's keep going. How are we doing on time? Are people getting tired? I want some fruits, some nuts, some water.
It's what time we are
Yeah.
in.
It's 8:45.
I think we should be
Yeah.
ending it up. Maybe you could
Why don't we get to
summarize a
nine?
little
Let me
bit.
finish this section, and then we'll
'cause
get
it's
a
time.
handful of nuts and.
Yeah,
Okay,
just,
okay.
and then we'll summarize and then we'll see where we are.
בראש העליון של הקו נמשך מן האור מהאינסוף עצמו ונוגע בו. אמנם, and it touches it, ואומנם סיום הקו הזה למטה לסופו, אינו נוגע באור אינסוף, ודרך הקו הזה נמשך ונפשט אור אינסוף למטה. So, אמנם סיום הקו הזה, the bottom of this line, למטה בסופו אינו נוגע באור אינסוף. The bottom does not touch the Or Ein Sof. בדרך הקו הזה נמשך ומנפשט אור אין סוף למטה. Rather, it flows Or Ein Sof, the light of the infinite, down below, meaning to the actual point of pure constriction below. ובמקום החלל ההוא, האציל ברא ויצר ועשה כל העולמות כולם. And in the place of this space were formed and created and made all of the worlds. והקו הזה כאין צינור דק אחד. And rather this line is like a very thin small pipe. אשר בו מפשט ונמשך מן האור העליון של אין סוף אל עולמות אשר במקום האוויר והחלל ההוא. Rather, this functions as a line to bring down light from the halal, nivrata, katsat, inyan, hakira, mekubalim, etc. Okay, I'm going to stop here right now
I think that's a
people
good
are,
place because you're going, because now
about
you're going to start to
get-
go into
get-
the
get
worlds.
Get into the worlds and other
Yeah,
things,
so
and
that's like a good,
it's a good place to wrap it up.
all of this
you
is
want
in my
to-
book, New Age Judaism.
Because I
New
learned
Age
this chapter.
I learned this,
Okay.
but, so I,
Any-
you know, I guess, maybe not now, what I wanna know whether this kind of learning is meaningful to you. You know, maybe you can email me about it, whether you wanna continue, cause this is, you know, this is Kabbalah. And it may speak to you and it may not speak to you. And then maybe we also want to know, see, for me, when I was learning this, I want to take it from the abstract so that I can actually experience it, not just intellectually, but in my being, I can know it. So that's another level, and if that's something you're interested in. So, if anybody, you know, feel free to email me about your experience and what you want, and if you have any comments or questions to share with the group now, let's take a few moments to do that about tonight, the learning.
I liked it was very, very abstract out there. The concepts are very difficult to understand. It would help if you had a sheet of paper for each of us with key notes, points, and we'll explain
Okay.
what's going on.
Yeah, well, I'm a beginner
Okay.
Yes.
at Kabbalah, and but I'm very interested in learning it. But I think you did a very good job at simplifying it and making it understandable. Because I've been to lectures that I didn't understand one word, and
Well,
I'm just getting, you know, we just covered very, very little.
sure.
Yeah, but I think you explained it very, very well, and I'm understanding. The only thing is I'm not gonna be here, I'm going back up north
Oh, too bad, okay.
in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So, if you're running it when I come back, I would be very interested in continuing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming. It's great to welcome. Be more aggressive about asking questions. Don't be too shy about it.
Well, it takes a while to absorb what you're saying. To be able to, I appreciate the intensity. I appreciate your learning with you and your teaching and your explanation. I get to a point where, you know, after about an hour and a half, it's like being so focused, it's hard to.
Right.
I felt pretty okay until we got to the line business, and then
Right. I had a feeling we were
lost me there.
getting.
I find it's fascinating. I appreciate learning from the text. It would be a little bit. I mean, I'm more used to having an English translation in front of me that I can annotate, or that I can, you know, as you're reading, I like hearing the Hebrew. It's, I could then, you know, explain the concepts, but I guess I just appreciate what you have to offer. And,
Okay.
I also can't be here next week, but I would be interested in.
Okay, great.
Is there a English translation of this book?
There is.
My friend, the person that I learned, Chaim, did an English translation of it. Sri Yosef Today.
Is it available?
It is, I think it is.
Is he from the Krabach show?
Yeah.
He wrote an English translation?
Huh?
I didn't know he wrote an English translation.
Yeah, no, he did, that's who I learned with, and he was translating it as he was learning it, and it is available.
But
At least it was years ago.
Right.
But see what,
that's the way it is.
well, see what you have with Yaakov is you can have the English translation, you know, word by word, but you may not be able to understand the concepts.
Oh, no,
It'd be helpful to
it's just
have
at the
the
same time.
English translation, yeah, I think it's helpful, but to understand, you know, the concepts.
I'm not so personally. It's a tough book. I'll tell you. I mean, there's a lot of rabbis who've been learning for many years who they tried going through 50 pages. They just put it down. It's not because they don't understand the Hebrew or the language. It's just it's very abstract.
But for me, when I learned Eitz Chaim formed the basis of this book, and I was able to take the meditations to a much deeper level based on what I learned here, because he kind of, there's a whole map of reality. So through meditation, you can start to understand it, and so I found it. But I told him, if you get too far, then it gets really, this is abstract, this is not abstract.
Then what is?
When it gets deeper in it, I mean, I missed a few weeks, and it was so abstract, I had no idea what was going on.
The thing is that I really differ from most Kabbalah teachers, because the vast majority teach the book. And if it's sort of like, you know, imagine you're going to the mall and some of those, you know, you are here signs, you know, those, you know. Imagine I just put you in a completely black room and I handed you the map, and you weren't standing around looking at the mall around you, and you know, I just handed you the map and that's all you had, and you didn't realize you're supposed to look up and use it as a map to like look around the mall. And you just sat there studying the map and trying to memorize it. That's what most Kabbalah classes do, is they try to help you really learn the map, meaning the book. But it doesn't help you know God so much if you don't look up. The point isn't to know the book. I don't view that as the point of learning Kabbalah. I view the point of learning the book is to know God, not to know the book. You know, I don't think that's why they wrote the book, but that's a very rare approach. You know, the vast majority of, you know, I'd say 99% at least of the Kabbalah classes you'll ever go to are going to teach you the book.
But we want the
They're-
experience.
They're not trying to teach you about God through the book.
Right, but you have to start
Right.
somewhere to.
Right, but I'm doing the second, and that's why people don't get lost in the minutia, which is really what people usually mean by how abstract it is the minutia of all these names of God and this and the other thing, is because they're getting lost in the book and not connected to God through the book.
So that, I think that's what I was saying before, is like, it's not that we have to understand everything with our minds, but that we can open ourselves to receive
Right.
the light of the learning, and that in time we'll understand. It's like learning a language.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, you know, I heard somebody was speaking about this. We could learn a language where we learn this word, that word, this word, that word, and we try to memorize the vocabulary. Or we could open and somehow we'll absorb it in a way that, and we'll start speaking. That's the best way to learn a language.
Good job.
Don't feel
I
that you
too agree that I enjoy your style.
Okay.
And it's good
Any questions?
at this point.
Okay. You can have a turn too if you want.
Well, I've been talking.
Okay.
And you don't have to speak if you know, like, you go around, don't feel obligated if you say anything unless you want to.
Well, I mean, I'm a long-time student,
Okay.
and I tend to understand things more through my being on an energetic level, and I always kind of, the understanding comes later, the intellectual understanding, so that's, I guess, what I enjoy, that, you know, when if I just go away with one thing, that's like huge.
Awesome.
And I did, I mean, I love the whole thing with the spirit,
Mhm.
and that, you know, that creation would have collapsed
Right.
without that. And I'm fascinated to find out about, because we're speaking about worlds, because one of my questions always has been, because I know that there are other worlds and I understand dimensions, but, you know, what exactly happened? Like, why did some of those worlds, you know, that are, you know, were created like that? Like, what was that process? I don't know if we're getting into that at all,
We
but
are
you
getting
did talk
into
about
that.
worlds, so
We
that
are.
kind of piqued my interest.
We're very much getting into that, but basically, what worlds are in you know, is sort of worlds are basically how can I put it? It's basically more abstract versions of exactly what you see here. But when I say abstract, what I really mean is more energy, less physical. So something that's, if you were looking at it through your third eye, you'd see something that's actually a lot more real and a lot less styrofoam, because the world we live in is like, from the perspective of the soul, is basically just the absolute thinnest eggshell of nothing. You almost, you know, when we press it with our physical bodies, it seems so incredibly real, but from a spiritual perspective, it's just so shockingly not even here. It's just appallingly flimsy. You can't even believe it's actually here. It's just so, I mean, even calling it styrofoam is absurd, you know. And the higher up you go into the higher worlds, the more dense and energetically dense and real the world, the existence becomes, the more tangible it becomes. And what is tangible means the more glistening, the more new, the less dead it looks, the more it looks like like morning instead of evening. It's just simply radiant. It's like a car with wax on it in the sunshine versus sort of a dusty old car in twilight. Just the whole world's just shining. That kind of thing in terms of and just dense and hard and real and just vibrant and full of light. And there's no room for evil, because it's literally full of God. I mean, the world we live in, the reason there is so much evil is that there's just so little of anything real here.
What is that
in the
supposed to mean?
in the physical world. I mean, I'll put it in very, very practical terms. If we look at a block of something, give me a very, a very heavy substance, like a brick of gold. You can barely pick it up. It's extremely heavy, a block of lead, okay? A huge block of lead, it'd be hundreds and hundreds of pounds, right? So we think it weighs a ton, and if you punched it, you're gonna break your fist. It's very solid, it's very tangible, it's very real. But any scientist will tell you that it's basic, that it is 99, and then spend the rest of your day writing nines, 0.999999999, etc., percent empty space. It's just nothing there. If you took all of the molecules in the entire Earth and you smushed them all together, it would be, smaller than that. Just nothing there. Just all empty space. Just nothing there. It's just all empty space. And the fact that we know this, scientifically now is interesting, but spiritually, it's just this is the idea of the klipa, of the shell, of the husk that we've talked about. And I'm sure many of you have heard this concept. It's the idea that, this world we live in is like the chametz on Pesach. It's this big inflated thing that is just this big inflated ego that is kind of bouncing around, and it's like this big bouncy toy, and it is real. Don't let somebody tell you that it's an illusion. It's not. It is real. It has a very authentic reality to it. Anybody who tells you the world's not real, let them be hungry for a week, and even a day, and they'll come back to you and they'll change their mind. It's definitely real, but it's just such an incredibly low level of reality. It's everyone knows it's low. But when you really get some perspective on how low, it's just mind-blowing. And so going back to your idea of the worlds, there really are a progressive series of worlds where it's not 99.9999999% empty, where it goes progressively more and more and more and more and more energetically filled with light, to the point where in the highest worlds it's mostly full of divine light and love, and it's that there's very little space for Ra, for evil. Now,
Now, when
there,
you're saying the worlds, how would this compare to like dimensions? Or is that getting too much right now?
I think we should.
I want to.
Next week.
Next week, because it's
Yeah,
getting
we
late.
can keep going and going and going.
Yeah, now it's
Okay.
getting more
But
interesting, but.
I will tell you very, very, very quickly that worlds, just one last point, are right here. They're not somewhere else. They're all right here. They're all folded on top of each other, all in the same place, and they're just different paths, they're different levels of right here. Okay.
Venus or anything, anybody else want to say something?
So, Yitzhak Luria, he's the same as the Arizal, right? And his mikveh is inspired.
Yeah. It's very cold.
I don't know, I wasn't in it, but my husband was.
Yeah, it's freezing.
They're all freezing, all those necklaces.
Yeah.
I went once,
Well, they're not heated, like
Yeah.
natural heat was.
I wouldn't go to any. I went to Israel with the Kabbalah Center in
Yeah.
'98, and all these women are going, I'm like,
They went into
they
the
talked to me
original.
once, I'm like, no way, never again, I can't take anything cold. It was an experience.
It's abstract, but it's interesting.
Uh-huh.
So, I'll be here when I can.
Awesome. Great. Did you have any questions or anything?
No, not at this point, I sort of have a fried brain.
Okay, you're
It's
up.
all too deep for me.
Okay. Well,
Okay,
thank you so much for
thank
coming.
you, and if you'd like to make I think
Yeah,
we have a
first
little
one.
bag to make a little contribution, for the money. Oh, that white little, this white thing.
I think I kept you too long. I thought she was keeping time. You were supposed to keep time.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So you're not come back if you're keeping too long. You're flag of them.
But, what do you want? You cut it in here, please, thank you. But you read my book, New Age.
Oh, sure.
But it's all very simple, but you took it just like people.
So how did you come to me?
We died, there was a Makubal Minyan in Jerusalem. that
I
went
liked
to
your
and-
comments. I really was wondering what was happening with the
Common
dimensions.
friend.
Should we turn this off?
Contact
Yeah,
him.
but because of my should we turn your
So
phone
that was,
off?
Oh, yeah, sure, I can. I think it's off. Is it off?
Yeah.
Still going? Oh my goodness. Is it still running?